Okay, so first of all, welcome. My name is Arno Laeven. I see a couple of familiar faces around here, but I don't know everyone. So my first question was actually, who's a developer in the room? Just a few eyes. Someone raises his hand, and I know he's not working as a developer, but maybe that's your background. Okay. So I guess the rest is like from government business side. Is that correct? Yeah, okay, then I know what the audience is, and I can cater to that. And I'm actually thrilled to be here. My talk is very clickbaity, don't believe consultants. I'm a consultant myself, so don't believe me. Don't know whether that is the message here. But indeed, I work now for the Energy Web Foundation. I'm going to talk a lot about the Energy Web Foundation today, because I think Energy Web Foundation is one of the consortia in the world, actually, that has been set up in a way that others can learn from. I'm not here to give you a recipe, because that was also the subtitle of my clickbaity title, because there are no recipes to consortia. Michael Zargim in his talk just mentioned that when you use data, you're always looking in the rearview mirror. And that's the same when you try to learn from what others have done. You're looking in the rearview mirror, but maybe there are some interesting signposts that you can actually learn from, what some have done, what some have done well, what some could have done better. And I'm not here to bash any other consortia out there, but I am going to be frank on my opinion on some of them. So if you feel offended, please come to me afterwards, or maybe even during the talk. That's fine. We can discuss about it. But I'm just going to be open and frank about what I think about certain consortia. I'm talking to you from the trenches of the enterprise blockchain, because that's where my life has evolved around in the last 5 years, starting with Philips and now with Energy Web and the other companies in between. So, and one of the lessons that I learned actually when being in the trenches of enterprise and blockchain, and this was my time at Shell, is that building a fucking good product is not even a beginning. And I know that especially sounds harsh for those of you who are developers, but I know also a lot of product people will think, what's this? It is all about the product, right? If the product works, then people come. The interesting thing is, actually, no. So I got approached by a startup that had a fantastic, but really a fantastic solution in the area of shipping. And the interesting thing was they were from the industry, so they knew everything they were talking about. They had a good tech team. They kept their product simple, and they solved a real problem. And for those of you who are around a little bit longer in blockchain, they know, roughly the problems in shipping and what blockchain is trying to solve there. The interesting thing is that they, besides some one-off POCs that they didn't get any traction in the market. And why not? Because their technical implementation that would only save the industry's problem if there was a wide adoption of the solution, right? So yeah, it was a good technical solution, but it would only solve something if everybody would adopt it. And that was the problem. So I said to them, this is great, but come back to us once you have gathered a group of companies that also wants to work on this, and then we can talk about, let's say, implementing your product and doing something with it. So having a good product in itself is not something that will get you there. You need a coalition of the willing. A coalition of the willing that not only sees something in this product, but also is willing to actually change their ways of working. Because the product in itself would also impact the processes within the shipping industry. And if you're not able or willing to change these processes, then there's no use of actually implementing such a product. And I checked yesterday whether the company is still around, and they are. The interesting thing is they pivoted towards something else, and they are now creating the standard for a standardization body for one of the large industry groups within the shipping industry. So you see that ultimately they also came to the conclusion that's the place where we want to be, and that's how we want to do. So for a decentralized digital product to be adopted in an industry, you really need a consortium. And a little side step to why that is. After this one. A blockchain use case inside your company is not the right start either. I mean, I know that it's the start that most of us make. You know, I have been there as well, at Philips, at Shell, at KLM. Some of the use cases we built were meant internally first, or built internally first with a small group of people. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if? Yes, it was really cool if we did that. But ultimately, if you really want it to work, then you need others to collaborate with. You need others in your coalition to actually deploy the product and make it a success. And the reason is we need to understand first what decentralization and the enterprise actually means. I wrote a blog post about it. It's on Medium. Because what I found in these companies is that most modern companies are actually, they have outsourced so much of their business, even their core stuff, that at least 50% of a company today is actually bureaucracy, is trying to manage and coordinate all the contractors that they have. A company like Shell has roughly 80,000 employees worldwide, but they have, I think, twice as many contractors. So if you see a Shell platform, in most cases it has the brand Shell, but it's operated by completely different companies, and mostly by 10 or 20 companies at the same time. Can you imagine the kind of coordination problem that goes into that? So the biggest enthusiasts about blockchain technology or decentralization in a company are often those that have to deal with this bureaucracy. People in procurement and contracting that come to you and say, oh, if only we would have a solution for this. So a lot of the use cases actually revolve, and it makes sense in large corporations, is actually if we look at the way that we can digitize bureaucracy. And to put the argument about bureaucracy in some more sexy language, we could argue that blockchains are actually enabling automation of coordination in large-scale cyber-physical systems. Cyber-physical in the sense that where the digital world touches upon the real world, where people, machines, cars, what have you, interact with the digital reality. That is where the biggest problem lies today for many enterprises, and that is where most are looking for a solution, looking for a shared infrastructure. The analogy of the vending machine is really great, actually. Actually, that's not mine, but it's not my vending machine, but it's also not my analogy. The vending machine is a great analogy because it's an automated transaction between me and a soda company to get me a drink. And the interesting thing is the vending machine does not need to know me or need to trust me. It just works. And the interesting thing is also, I'm not paying for the vending machine, I'm paying actually for what comes out of it. So it's a sort of an infrastructure to get me a drink, but it's not about the machine itself. And a lot of blockchain use cases are actually exactly the same, and the systems that we're trying to build. So if we want to automate coordination, we really need to get to an agreement on what kind of coordination we want. You cannot do that by just introducing a product. You really need to collaborate to make it work. So designing and deploying large-scale coordination systems in industries really requires critical mass, transcending the enterprise boundaries. And I just want to get this picture in because that's where I was last week. Critical mass of snow, and then you can go powder skiing. You don't need everyone in an industry on board from day one. I think that is really important to notice. So how do you gather critical mass? And it was actually interesting this morning, the talk by Christopher Allen, because he was describing this perfectly. He gave such a compelling talk, such a good narrative, that I'm sure that a lot of you, if not already looking into self-sovereign identity, you're actually compelled now to look into it and maybe join the movement of self-sovereign identity. Look at DIDs, which is absolutely great, what has been done there. And I think there are more examples of having great narratives and talking about having a good story. Many of the challenges that I see here have a great narrative. What you want to solve, whether it's in energy, whether it's in identity, whether it's in nature-based solutions. It starts with a narrative. Gather people around you that actually want to help you solve this challenge and solve this solution. But what is critical mass really depends on your goal. And I made a little bit of a, after all, I'm still a consultant, I made a little graph here where I put some consortia on these two axes. What is your target group? Either it's very generic global, or it's very specific local. And it can be a specific industry, but it can also be a specific geography. And on the other side, what is your goal? Is your goal to build an infrastructure or to change an infrastructural process? Or is it to build an application, a very, very specific use case? And what you see is when you start to plot the different, or some of the consortia out there on this axis, is that they move in that direction. And I would actually say that more and more what you will see is this space will start to get crowded. For the simple reason that some of the infrastructure that has been built and that is being built is actually pretty damn good. So why would you go into the infrastructure layer if it's already there? And luckily, more and more companies are also trying to are recognizing that let's not go into the infrastructure side. Let's not build yet another blockchain, permission blockchain, but let's use what is out there, either a permission chain like Hyperledger, or let's use a public chain or a public private chain. And of all of these, I think there is something to say. So if you look at the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, of course, there the idea is how can we take Ethereum and make that acceptable or make that into a standard for the enterprise? So they gathered a lot of companies, actually. And in the beginning, I would say too many. It became really like, we have a Dutch saying, I don't know whether that's international, like a Polish gathering, where you would have so many people talking at the same time about the topic that nothing actually happens. Because you have too many voices in the room. Ultimately, it worked out fine. They came up with great things. They had good working groups, so that is fine. But in the beginning, that really was a problem. And I remember because Shell became a member of EEA, but after a year or so said, what are they actually doing? What is the purpose of this? Why are we in this? And I think that is something that is good to remember when you start a consortium. These members have expectations, so you can gather a lot of members, but you also have to fulfill their expectations. And if you have too many with a very vague, some of them really FOMO kind of reason to actually join your consortium, then you spend more time on actually pleasing your members than actually getting somewhere and building something. VACT is another example of a consortium, but on the other hand, very specific. Post-trade settlement in the oil and gas industry. Really, all the parties in there, they knew each other already. So you could even argue, did they have to form a consortium? Why? They know each other, they trust each other, etc., etc. But still, they built something, and they thought it was a good idea to use, and in the use case in itself was really good. Post-trade settlement using blockchain technology. And then in between here somewhere is the energy web. And again, I will get to it. So gathering critical mass and building a great product is important, but it begs the question, what was first? What do you do first? It's really a chicken and egg situation. Do you first gather critical mass, or do you first build a great product? If we look at a consortium like TradeLens, which was started by IBM and Maersk, they first built a great product. At least, I don't know the product from really working with it, but I'm gathering it's a great product. I mean, it's IBM, it must be a great product. They don't pay me, so... so it must be a great product, but they thought, let's build a great product and build the consortium afterwards. I think, and I don't know whether there are any IBM people in the room. Come on, you can just say it. No? They built a great product, but when they started to build a consortium, everybody said, I don't know. You know, A, you're working with Maersk, that's our competitor. Why would we join you? And B, yeah, it's actually, when I look at the solution, it is very IBM-ish. So am I now, do I have a lock-in with IBM if I'm going to use this? So the question is whether that is the right way to do. And actually, a lot of the consortia that start that way are being started by vendors. And I think that consortia that are started by vendors are probably not the best consortia or the ones that are most likely to succeed, to be honest. So what about gathering critical mass first? I already mentioned the example of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, but there's definitely some others that first rallied up a lot of companies and said, okay, and then we are going to build a great product. But then you have to have a very, very compelling story to rally up all these companies to trust you actually with money, but also to trust that you are going to accomplish something that is meaningful. And again, as I said, it takes a lot of time if you have all these members with their expectations to actually fulfill these expectations. So managing the members in itself becomes a day task. That can deviate you from what you're actually trying to achieve is ultimately also building a great product. So what the Energy Web has done right in a way is actually combining the two. Focusing on a great product and gathering critical mass. And what is critical mass? I mean, when you start out, critical mass can be just a handful of companies. A handful of companies that are, let's say, that give you enough credibility so that the rest of the industry sees, here's something going on, right? And critical mass also means that if you are trying to build a solution for, let's say, a supply chain, that you have an even representation of all the companies in the supply chain and not just one group at the beginning or at the end of the supply chain, but it's an even representation. So what really helped with the Energy Web Foundation is 4 things. First of all, there was a very, very clear vision. And the vision was, we need a decentralized infrastructure to make the energy transition happen, to make sure that distributed energy resources like solar, like battery, etc., make them part of the electricity grid. You have to do that decentralized for a couple of reasons. And one of the reasons actually is because you don't know who the players are going to be ultimately, and you want to make it an open and transparent system, because the alternative is that you create a very centralized look at it, but that means that it's extremely difficult to onboard, for example, these distributed energy resources. And I will get a little bit deeper into that example in a minute. Then there was the technical know-how. So it literally was that the people from Grid Singularity, Ed Hesse, who is also here, who is hosting one of the challenges with Grid Singularity, he went to the guys at the Rocky Mountain Institute, and the Rocky Mountain Institute is a think tank from the early 80s, who are roughly the same as Greenpeace. The only thing they said, we're not Greenpeace, we're not going to protest, we're going to help companies and governments to actually make the energy transition happen. So they work a lot with large corporates, with governments all over the world to make the energy transition happen already since the early 80s, 1980s. These two came together and they said, wait, so we want the energy transition to happen. We see a lot of new technologies actually coming on board. And then the guys from Grid Singularity said, well, you know, we understand blockchain. We think we have something here. And that narrative was so compelling to some strong initial members, there were 10 of them, I have a few of them up here, that they said, well, this is an initiative we want to join because we believe you guys can actually pull it off. And the interesting thing is, EWF pulled it off. This year, so it was, EWF was established in 2017, and the first milestone was we are going to build our own blockchain based on Ethereum. And June 2019, the mainnet was launched. And that's great. You know, now we promise. So now what happens? It's built. What is next? And that was exactly the moment also that I came into EWF, because we were really, the people at EWF were looking at each other. Right, we delivered on our promise. What are we going to do next? Actually, we thought that a lot of our members would start building on top of our infrastructure and would have their applications running on our chain. But as it turned out, only very few did. I mean, one of them stayed in, we're also here in the room, built a nice application, Elia, one of the companies that built a nice application. But it was still very, very, very small. So we actually recognized at that point that maybe the task of the consortium of EWF goes a little bit further than just building the infrastructure layer. It is also trying to build the stack further up the stack. Not only technically, but also helping the members of EWF to actually come up with sensible use cases. And that is exactly what we are doing right now, what EWF is doing, and what I'm helping them with. And they fall into two main, let's say, products, or two buckets, if you will. One of them is around certificates of origin. Renewable energy certificates, you might know them. So if you buy green energy, let me spoil something for you. You're actually not buying green energy. You're buying a certificate of green energy, because you cannot know whether the electrons that come out of your socket are actually green. So you're buying a certificate. To make that system work and make it verifiable, it is great to have something like a tamper-proof distributed ledger that actually makes sure that once a megawatt of green energy is produced, that actually is also going through the chain, and ultimately also such a certificate is retired, and it cannot be spent twice. So the double spend problem that you're trying to solve is very clear with certificates of origin. EWF is working on this all over the world. One of the largest projects right now is happening in Thailand. In Asia, there is not a very regulated market around renewable energy. So this is actually immediately taking the place of what might be systems in other places in the world. And that is interesting. But it's, as I said, it's happening all over the world. So there are companies that are using this. The other one is a little bit more, I would say, invasive when we talk about existing energy systems. And that is what we call the Energy Web Flex Hub. And flexibility, for those of you who are not from the energy background, flexibility is extremely important, because as you can imagine, so the high voltage lines always have to stay at a specific frequency, 50 hertz to be exact. It can vary really a little bit up and down, but if it varies too much, then boom, you're out of electricity. So to keep that running, you actually need to sometimes power up or power down certain sources. Now, the interesting thing is that more and more sources come onto the net. So we have wind, we have solar, but not only in large wind farms on the North Sea, but also in your house. So if companies, those that manage actually the grids or the transmission system operators and the distribution system operators, if they are able to use that kind of energy and electricity to actually balance their grid, that would be great. That was the question, that was the challenge. And we started to build that together with one of the NHWeb members, APG in Austria, which they are the ones that manage the high voltage lines, in a way that they will be able to use a household battery, which maybe is related to a solar panel or connected to a solar panel, to use the capacity of that battery to actually sell the additional capacity that the household doesn't need onto the larger market and use it to balance the grid. Now, one household battery doesn't make a difference, but 1 million batteries do. And in that way, there's a simpler way and a better way to actually balance out the grid. And balancing the grid is becoming more and more and more important, because if we rely more on solar and wind, they are not always there. So you really need to balance the grid, and the demand also becomes more flexible. So the peaks are higher. And therefore, flexibility is becoming important. These are the two main use cases that are now run on the NHWeb chain. And why do I give this example? Because it goes beyond, let's say, that infrastructure. It's really helping also the members to think of, what can I do with this technology? Even though they bought into the fact that they wanted to become a part of the NHWeb Foundation, they still, needed to get help on getting things done. And I think it goes even beyond that, because what is the next step? We can do this for the company APG, but if the other Austrian players in the electricity grid in Austria are not playing along, then it doesn't make sense. So you need device manufacturers on there, but you also need a distribution systems operator, et cetera, et cetera. And the same is happening here in the Netherlands. There are great PUCs being built, but on a very local scale. If you really want to scale that up to a national level, you need to work together. And I think the movement that you saw, let's say, in that graph, that consortia become more specific, could also happen there. So I think it would very much make sense to have an Austrian or a Dutch electricity or energy consortium that is looking specifically into blockchain. Now, there are some hurdles to be taken there, but well, we can discuss them in the Q&A. So back to gathering critical mass, building a great product. So when we talk about gathering critical mass, this is the state of where EWF is right now with all these members and building a great product. You see that the chain is only here. All the rest of the technology is actually more up the stack. And building really a new operating system for the electricity grid. If you have more specific questions on the stack, then we would be happy to answer that. Walter, the CEO of EWF, is also in the room, so we can talk to you afterwards. So I believe that Odyssey really is a great start, but the real work only begins after the hackathon. Because I'm pretty sure that there will be teams that are going to build fantastic solutions to the challenges. But let's be honest, what can you really build in 3 days? Technically, probably, pretty neat things. And I've seen in the past in the hackathons that there were really cool things being built. But hey, what then? What is going to happen then? And my suggestion would be, is to take a sort of an iterative approach. So this is what you're trying to solve, your North Star, your challenge, whatever you call it. And then build one by one more critical mass and a great product. And I think that Odyssey in here can be a really good first step. But after that, find other partners to really pilot the solution with in real life, create an MVP, scale up, and that leads to ultimately solving your challenge. At least that's the way that has proven to be successful so far. But then again, Satoshi didn't need a consortium. And with that, I would like to open up the floor for questions. Thank you very much.
think you just solved the Vattenfall challenge of Odyssey making a flex hub.
Yeah, I tweeted about that when they presented the challenge, and then someone corrected me because it is true. There are more ways that that challenge can be solved. But yeah, maybe EWF will send in a team. But we're still negotiating. Right. Other questions?
You showed the example of fact, and you said all the stakeholders knew each other.
Yeah.
But I think there is still a lot of efficiency and effectiveness being reached to build a blockchain, but because they don't trust each other, really. And you have real bureaucratic control, maintenance control behind the scene, which can be effective solved with a blockchain.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that, okay, so you can ask two questions. If you have a smaller group that comes together in a consortium, why haven't they done that before and used other technology to do that? Maybe because they don't trust each other or they haven't found the right way to do that. So I agree. And in this specific use case, doing post-trade settlement, you can make that much easier. So it's more about efficiency in post-trade settlement rather than, let's say, creating a system in which you solve a grand challenge, if you will. But it's very much around efficiency. And so I agree to that. I understand why they came together and why they're doing it like that.
And I think it's also a beginning for the blockchain concept. So you grab your mind about the concept, and it's a start.
Yeah.
To go further than that.
Yes.
So it's more private blockchain, but I think it will help to also from efficiency.
Absolutely. Yep.
I have a slightly provocative question.
Sure.
Why blockchain?
Yeah, no, that's not provocative. I mean, I would say in most cases, blockchain doesn't actually matter. I would say decentralization matters in a lot of cases. And the reason why you want to have it decentralized is because, for instance, in the case of energy, you want to create an open and fair system in which everyone can participate, and it has to be somehow verifiable. And again, I'm not saying it needs to be blockchain. Actually, if you look at our solution that we're building in the Flex Hub, it has a very small blockchain part in it. We're using DIDs. We're using all kinds of other technologies, decentralized technologies that have nothing to do in itself with blockchain. That also means that it can work with any blockchain ultimately to anchor, let's say, some of the things that you're doing. But it's more about verifying claims and what have you.
Sorry, if I may ask a slightly follow-up question.
Sure.
What specifically do you mean by decentralization?
Sorry?
What is decentralization? Can you define it more specifically?
Yeah, so I can say it's about architectural decentralization, political decentralization. I'm now just following, let's say, Vitalik's definition of this, and logical centralization is as he says it, right? And I think that definitely makes sense in such a case. That if I would have a battery, and I would allow that battery to trade on an open market, its kilowatt hours, then the question is, do I want my battery to trade that with a centralized entity? Yes, can be. But how do I know that, let's say, whatever my battery is trying to trade, whether that is done in a fair way? I cannot verify whatever is happening. Moreover, I cannot verify what is happening with the metadata coming from that battery because electricity consumption data is actually very sensitive. I mean, you can derive all kinds of things from the way that your energy consumption pattern is in your household. So it's also, very private data, I would say. So I want a system that does things in a verifiable way, where I can see what is happening to my data, where it is going, and who is doing what with it. And also make sure that I can verify that I have been treated in an honest and fair way. Okay. Other questions? Yep.
Just a question in terms of your experience, because you build up obviously a blockchain team, the innovation team with different large boards. Now, the classic conundrum you see is that innovation, particularly in classic corporate models, is always, particularly in technology, is how do you organize the business combining with the technology. And obviously, you don't the same customers, but in order to move and build stakeholders, often the internal challenges on how innovation is organized can be quite an impediment to that to achieving that change. Can you share some of your lessons learned in those companies within that broader context of building coalition and actually let the product and the technical knowledge and data flourish in that ecosystem?
Sure, and it's a great question. I wonder about that all the time because there is no there is no optimal system here. I think you have to do a lot of things. What I really liked about the way that Shell has organized its innovation and its exploration into new technologies is that they put it separately from IT. That's a good start, right? The reason is extremely simple, because if you walk into a business and you say, oh, hey, I'm with IT innovation, and the first thing they ask is, oh yeah, can you help me because my login to this and that is not working? Solve that first and then we talk about innovation. I literally experienced that in another company. So they put it aside from IT. They said, look, if you do new technologies, give it a different structure. But at the same time, we don't do technological innovation for innovation's sake. It has to lead to something. So if you want to get funded, you have to go to a business, and you have to really solve a problem for a business. There it tends to get a little bit messy, because in some cases that helps, but if you talk about a fundamental technology that actually cuts across layers like blockchain does, then you have a problem talking to one business who has to fund the development of something that another business also benefits from. So first you have to get a coalition within the company by talking to all the business units. And what do the business units say? Well, yeah, not now because, my next quarter results, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this tension between solving a real problem. I know that's really popular to say, oh, it has to solve a real problem. I think that's nonsense. I think you have to actually look for really cool stuff to do and that this technology is enabling further down the line, and then translate that into what a business could actually do with it. And we have to get rid somehow within companies of this strange, hey, next quarter result thing when we talk about innovation that should not interfere with it. But okay. So if you would have an innovation budget that is open for that kind of innovation, and a budget you can tap into for longer term innovation, but at the same time you have some sort of stick that says, well, you need to solve something of a real problem for the business, then I think you make a good combination of two things. But as said, the one who solves that problem, well, actually, I don't know whether it's really solvable, because it's the inherent tension maybe of an organization. Does that sort of answer your question? Okay.
It's a very real problem, I understand. But coming down to the numbers, what percentage of Dutch energy is coming from variable sources like wind and...
I'm looking to the guy behind you because I'm sure he knows.
17% is renewable, and from that is 1.5 gigawatt hours from solar production at house.
And in Australia it's 51.
In Australia it's 51. In Norway it's 100%. That's why I know. No. For now, right? I think that the goal of an energy transition is also to grow that number, right? So while balancing maybe solves a problem right now or tries to tap into something right now, we want to grow that percentage. one of the issues that a lot of the companies in the industry have is that if you get more distributed energy resources, you need to invest in infrastructure, unless, and I'm not saying that no investment in infrastructure would be needed, but if you, next to that, also invest in optimizing the grid in a better way, using more data points, using that in the right way to actually control also these distributed energy resources, then you might be able to get away from some of the investments that would be needed into the infrastructure. And that's quite some money. I mean, the kind of money that is put into the infrastructure. Yeah.
That's the answer to my question.
Oh, thank you.
One last question.
Nope.
I will stop.
Yeah.
Where do you think in which part of the world would the Energy Web Foundation have the biggest impact? At this moment.
Ever? I think it's the easiest, let's say, is in those countries where infrastructure is not present. I think a product like Origin, therefore, in Asia, very much makes sense. At the same time, the biggest impact on what we want to achieve as Energy Web Foundation, fueling the energy transition, is actually to be made in those countries which, have the biggest legacy infrastructures. So I do think that US and Europe are extremely interesting in that sense, but it will take longer. I find that a very, very difficult question. Yes, again. No, but because what I could imagine is that if you build it somewhere and it's proven to work, then things can go fast, actually. Because then so let's say we succeed in Austria with making it really a new operating system for the Austrian grid. Or we do that here in the Netherlands, now looking at my Dutch friends here. Then all of a sudden that example can really inspire others in the world to say, we want this as well because it works, and now it is proven. Until that time, it is talk, and a lot of convincing. So that's why we rather build and convince by building. So it could go, but not between now and 5 years, I would say. It takes longer than that.
All right. I want to thank you, Arno.
Yeah.
Is it a really short question?
Short question. You see a lot of differences between Asia and, well, basically United States and Europe. What is your opinion on getting that together and build networks and ecosystems that are available?
Yeah, but
you did your best.
a very short answer
like
is.
Seconds.
A very short answer is I really don't have an idea. Sorry.
Feel free to talk about this after
Yeah.
your talk if you have time.
I can
for
connect
that.
you to some people who might have an idea. Thank you.
All right, Arno, thank you so much for your insights.